Hello, my name's Damian Fuller. At Dad's will reading, my sister smiled as the lawyers handed her control of his $41 million shipping empire. Then they turned to me and slid over a rusty set of boat keys. My mother leaned back and whispered, "That relic suits you perfectly." I should have walked out right then, but when the attorney pulled out one final sealed envelope, my sister's smile cracked. She called me the disappointment. N100 The Dad kept around out of obligation. But that day, she had no idea what kind of storm I was about to bring. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you watching and where are you tuning in from? Because this is where everything she thought she knew gets flipped upside down. And trust me, it only gets more intense from here. I hadn't stepped foot on Dad's estate in nearly 8 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. And I hadn't stepped foot on Dad's estate in nearly 8 years. Pulling through those iron gates felt like driving into a past I'd deliberately left behind, a version of myself I barely recognized anymore. The gardens were pristine, every hedge sculpted to magazine cover perfection. The fountain at the center of the circular drive still cascaded water like liquid silver, just as it had when I was younger, sneaking out at dawn to watch Dad prep his boat before sunrise runs. NEXCEPT. This time there was no smell of salt air and diesel fuel, just expensive perfume, pressed suits, and the thick scent of entitlement hanging in the atmosphere like coastal fog. NTHE front door swung open before I could knock. My sister Cora stood there, arms folded, that razor-sharp smile cutting across her face like she'd already won a game I didn't know we were playing. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," she said, voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Thought you'd skip this too, like you skip everything important." I stepped past her without a word. The entrance hall was exactly as I remembered it. Polished marble floors that echoed with every footstep, a crystal chandelier overhead that cost more than most people's houses, and family portraits lining the walls like a gallery of people who'd rather forget I existed. And voices drifted from the study. Laughter, the clink of champagne flutes, the sound of people celebrating something that hadn't even been finalized yet. "Damian," my mother called from the doorway, her tone flat and dismissive. "Do wipe your shoes. We just had the floors redone." And I glanced down. My boots were spotless, but that wasn't the point. It never was. NTHE study had been transformed into something resembling a corporate boardroom. Leather chairs arranged in a perfect semicircle, a table spread with catered food that looked like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant, and everyone dressed like they were attending a yacht club gala. I tugged at the collar of my button-down shirt, clean but clearly not expensive enough for this crowd. Simon Briggs, Dad's longtime attorney, stood at the head of the room, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he organized a stack of documents. He gave me a small, respectful nod. "Damian," he said quietly, "thank you for coming." And Cora leaned toward one of our cousins, stage whispering loud enough for me to hear. "Of course he came. There's free food and he probably needs it." A few people chuckled. I took a seat near the back, away from the main spotlight, and kept my eyes on the oil painting above the fireplace. Dad's portrait, commissioned 3 years before his heart attack. Strong jaw, steady eyes, that slight smirk he always wore when he knew something no one else did. NMR. Briggs cleared his throat, and the room fell into an expectant hush. "In accordance with the last will and testament of Richard Allen Fuller, the estate and assets shall be distributed as follows." Cora sat up straighter, fingers laced together like a CEO about to hear quarterly profits. "To Cora Lawrence Fuller," Mr. Briggs continued, his voice formal and measured, "control of Fuller Maritime Holdings, inclusive of all shipping contracts, offshore accounts, and subsidiaries, valued at approximately $41 million, along with the primary residence located at 1247 Harborview Drive, Ashford Bay." NTHE room erupted in polite applause. Cora's smile stretched wider. She turned to me, eyes gleaming with triumph. Guess Dad knew who really deserved to carry the legacy forward, and I didn't respond. I just stared at the folder in Mr. Briggs' hands, waiting. And to Damian Richard Fuller. Mr. Briggs paused, flipping to the next page. My chest tightened. I wasn't expecting millions, but maybe something. A keepsake, a letter, a single sign that I'd mattered. To Damian, he repeated slowly. The 1989 Coronado sailboat, registered under Richard Fuller's name and currently docked at Slip 29, Ashford Marina. Title and registration enclosed. Dead silence, and I blinked. My throat went dry. Cora snorted, then laughed outright. It was a sharp, cruel sound that bounced off the walls. A boat? That rotting piece of driftwood he refused to get rid of? She turned to our mother. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Nallison, my mother, sipped her wine and didn't even look at me. It's fitting, she said coldly. Some people are suited for empires. Others are suited for hobbies. A few of the relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up. My father, Allison's second husband, who'd been more of a bystander than a parent, stared at his hands like he wished he were anywhere else. NMR. Briggs slid a thick manila envelope across the table toward me. There's also a sealed letter, he said. Voice quieter now. Your father requested it remain unopened until after the reading. For your eyes only. And I stared at the envelope like it might explode. My hands didn't move. Go ahead, Cora said, swirling her champagne. Open it up. Maybe there's a coupon for boat wax inside. The room chuckled again, and I didn't move. My fingers curled tighter around the edge of my chair. Then my mother leaned forward, her voice like ice cracking. If he'd really wanted you to have something meaningful, Damian, don't you think he would have said so while he was alive? Let's be honest. You were the spare, the one who never quite measured up. NHER words landed like a punch to the gut. Not because they were true, but because she'd finally said what she'd been thinking for decades. I wanted to stand up. Wanted to say something sharp, something that would cut through the smugness in that room, but the words caught in my throat, tangled with years of being overlooked, dismissed, and erased. Instead, I stood slowly, picked up the envelope, and walked toward the door. NMR. Briggs called after me gently. Damian, your father specifically asked that you not open that in front of them. NBUTI was done listening. Done playing by their rules. And I stopped at the threshold, turned back to face them all, and broke the seal. The room fell silent again. Even the laughter dried up. Inside was a single handwritten note on Dad's personal stationery. His handwriting, unmistakable and bold, filled half the page. I took a breath and read it aloud, my voice steady despite the storm brewing in my chest. Damian, if you're reading this, they've already had their laugh. I knew they would. But this letter isn't for them. It's for you. The boat is yours for a reason. There's something hidden in the hull, something only someone who really knew me would think to look for. Keep it for 72 hours. Don't let them near it until you've found what I left. I trust only you. Love, Dad. NTHE room didn't just go quiet. It went still, like the air itself had frozen. And Cora's smile faltered. Just a flicker, but I saw it. My mother's wineglass paused halfway to her lips. NMR. Briggs glanced at me, then at the letter, and gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement. I folded the note carefully, slipped it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Then I held out my hand toward Mr. Briggs. Without hesitation, he placed the boat keys in my palm. They were heavier than I expected, worn and warm like they'd been waiting for me. And I turned and walked out, my boots echoing against the marble floor. And Cora's voice followed me, sharp and biting. If there's anything valuable on that boat, it was a mistake. And it still belongs to this family. Ben didn't turn around. I just said, loud enough for everyone to hear, then I guess I'm still part of it after all. NTHE door closed behind me with a soft final click. NTHE air outside felt different, lighter somehow, despite the weight pressing on my chest. The Texas heat had finally broken, replaced by a cool breeze rolling in from the bay. I stood on the front steps for a long moment, staring at the keys in my hand, feeling the grooves worn smooth by my father's fingers over decades. NTHE Marina was a 20-minute drive from the estate, down winding coastal roads lined with live oaks and stretches of wetland grass that swayed in the wind. I rolled the windows down and let the salt air fill the cab of my truck. No music. Just the hum of the engine and the distant cry of gulls circling overhead. Ashford Marina sat tucked into a quiet inlet, away from the tourist traps and flashy yacht clubs that dotted the coastline. This was a working marina, the kind where fishermen repaired nets at dawn, and old sailors swapped stories over thermoses of black coffee. The docks were weathered gray, pilings wrapped in barnacles and dried seaweed. The whole place smelled like brine, diesel, and decades of history soaked into the wood. And I parked near the harbormaster's office and walked down the main dock, my boots thudding hollow against the planks. Slip numbers were painted in faded white, some barely visible: 17, 21, 24. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. And then I saw it. In slip 29, NTHE Coronado sailboat sat low in the water, her hull streaked with algae and rust, her sails furled and covered in a tarp that had seen better days. The name across the stern was still visible, painted in chipped blue letters. Second Chance, and I stopped at the edge of the dock, just staring. This boat had been Dad's escape, his refuge. While Cora was busy learning the business, schmoozing clients, and positioning herself as the golden heir, Dad would disappear here every weekend. He'd spend hours sanding the deck, checking the rigging, talking to the boat like it was an old friend. And he'd bring me along. And I was maybe 8 the first time he let me steer. We'd sailed out past the breakwater, just the two of us, and he'd put my small hands on the wheel. "Feel that?" he'd said, standing behind me. "That's the current. She'll tell you where she wants to go if you listen." I remembered the way the sun felt on my face, the way the boat rocked gently beneath us, the way he laughed when I accidentally jibed and nearly knocked him overboard. Cora never came. Not once. She said sailing was boring, pointless, a waste of time better spent networking or studying market trends. NBUT Dad never stopped asking me, and I stepped aboard carefully. The deck creaked under my weight, but it held. I ran my hand along the rail, feeling splinters and peeling varnish beneath my palm. The tarp over the cockpit was tied down tight, knotted with the same bowline Dad had taught me years ago, and I untied it slowly, letting the canvas fall away. Beneath it, the cockpit was a mess. Old life jackets piled in one corner, a coil of frayed rope, a rusted toolbox, and a folding chair that had collapsed in on itself. But it was still her, still the Second Chance. I climbed down into the cabin. The hatch groaned as I pulled it open, and a wave of stale, musty air rolled out. I flicked on my phone's flashlight and ducked inside. NTHE interior was small, cramped, and smelled like mildew and old wood. A narrow bunk on each side. A tiny galley with a 2-burner stove. A navigation table cluttered with yellowed charts. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, untouched for months, maybe longer. I stood there, taking it all in. The coffee mug still sitting in the sink. The faded photograph pinned to the wall, me and Dad standing beside this very boat, both of us squinting into the sun, grins stretched wide, NMY chest tightened. He'd left me this. Not out of pity, not because it was all I deserved. NHE left it because he knew, and I pulled the letter from my pocket and read it again, slower this time. There's something hidden in the hull, something only someone who really knew me would think to look for. And I glanced around the cabin. The hull was solid fiberglass, no obvious panels or compartments. But Dad was meticulous. If he hid something, it wouldn't be easy to find. It would require patience, attention, the kind of care only someone who loved this boat would take. And I crouched down and ran my hands along the base of the bunk, feeling for seams, irregularities, anything out of place. Nothing. I checked the galley, the lockers, even the tiny head in the forward cabin. Still nothing. And then I remembered something. A conversation from years ago, back when I was maybe 15. We'd been patching a leak near the keel, and Dad had pointed to a section of the bilge. "See that panel?" he'd said. "Most people don't even know it's there. That's the thing about boats, son. They've got secrets if you know where to look." And I moved to the center of the cabin and pulled up the floorboards, exposing the bilge below. Water sloshed gently at the bottom, dark and oily. I shone my light down into the narrow space. And there, bolted to the inside of the hull, was a small waterproof case. Black, sealed tight, about the size of a shoebox. NMY heart started pounding, and I reached down, fingers brushing the cold metal latches. It was locked, but there was a small keyhole on the front. And I looked at the keys in my hand. 3 of them on the ring. 1 for the ignition, one for the cabin hatch, and one small brass key I didn't recognize. And I tried it. NTHE, lock clicked open. And I lifted the lid slowly. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat. Inside, wrapped in thick plastic, was a leather-bound journal. Beneath it, a stack of documents, and a USB drive taped to the inside of the lid, and I pulled the journal out first. The cover was embossed with Dad's initials, RAF, and I opened it to the first page. His handwriting filled the lines, neat and deliberate. If Damian is reading this, then I'm gone. And if you're reading this, son, it means you did what I always knew you would. You came looking. You didn't give up. That's why you're holding this now, and not her. I sat back on my heels, journal in hand. The sound of water lapping against the hull, the only noise in the world. And outside, the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the marina. Seagulls called in the distance. The wind picked up, rattling the halyards against the mast in a rhythmic, metallic song. And I didn't know what was in the journal yet. Didn't know what was on the USB drive or what the document said. NBUT. I knew one thing for certain. Dad hadn't forgotten me. He'd been preparing me all along. And I sat in the cabin for what felt like hours, though it was probably only 30 minutes. The journal rested open on my lap, pages filled with Dad's tight, slanted handwriting. Each entry was dated, some going back 15 years. At first, I thought it was a captain's log, records of trips and repairs, but the deeper I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't a logbook. It was evidence. End page after page, documented financial discrepancies, payments that didn't match invoices, contracts signed under questionable terms, shipping routes that appeared on paper but never happened in reality. And woven through it all, one name kept appearing over and over again, and Cora NMY hands tightened on the edges of the journal. I flipped forward, scanning faster now, my pulse picking up with every line. Knots 2018. Cora authorized payment to Vanguard Logistics, $340,000. No corresponding shipment record. Checked with dock supervisor, no vessels arrived that week. July 2019, offshore account transfer, $580,000 to LLC registered under Allison's maiden name. Cora signed off. No board approval. November 2021. Cora renegotiated fuel contract with Brennan Supply at 22% markup. Original vendor offered same terms at 9%. Difference funneled into consulting fees paid to shell company she controls. And I stopped reading and stared at the page, my stomach churning. She hadn't just inherited the empire. She'd been stealing from it for years. And Dad had known. And I set the journal aside and reached for the stack of documents. They were organized with the same meticulous care Dad brought to everything. Bank statements, wire transfer receipts, incorporation papers for LLCs with names that sounded legitimate but led nowhere. And then, buried near the bottom, I found something else. And a single piece of paper, older than the rest, edges yellowed with time. The letterhead read Fuller Maritime Holdings, and the title across the top made my breath catch. Transfer of ownership, partial stake. And I scanned the document, my eyes catching on the key details. It was a contract, signed and notarized, transferring a 30% ownership stake in Fuller Maritime to me. The date was from 12 years ago. I would have been 19, fresh out of community college, working part-time at the marina while Cora was getting her MBA, and I didn't remember signing anything like this. NBUT, there it was. My signature at the bottom, right next to Dad's. Witnessed by two people whose names I vaguely recognized, employees from the company's legal department. NMY mind raced. If this was real, if it was legally valid, then I wasn't just some guy with a boat. I was a stakeholder. A partial loaner, and Cora didn't control everything. I grabbed my phone and pulled up Mr. Briggs' contact. My thumb hovered over the call button for a moment, then I pressed it. NHE answered on the third ring. Damian? Mr. Briggs, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I found something. In the boat. I need to know if it's real. There was a pause. What did you find? A transfer of ownership document. Dad signed over 30% of Fuller Maritime to me. 12 years ago. It's notarized, witnessed, the whole thing. And silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, thinking, N. Was it filed? He finally asked. I don't know. That's why I'm calling you. Do you have the document number? The notary seal? And I flipped the paper over, scanning for details. Yes. Notary Public, Emma Calloway. Document number 4719283. Dated June 14th. Another long pause. Then Mr. Briggs exhaled slowly. Damian, if that document is authentic and it was filed with the county, it supersedes anything in the current estate distribution. Your father would have structured it as an irrevocable transfer. That means Cora doesn't have full control. She never did. NMY heart pounded so hard I thought it might crack a rib. What do I do? Bring it to my office. First thing tomorrow morning. Don't tell anyone. Don't let Cora know. And for God's sake, don't let that document out of your sight. Understood. Damian, he added, voice softer now. Your father was a smart man. If he hid this, he had a reason. Be careful. And I ended the call and sat in the dim cabin, the document clutched in my hand like a lifeline. NTHE sun had fully set now. The marina was quiet except for the soft creak of boats rocking in their slips and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. I climbed back up into the cockpit, needing air, needing space to think. That's when I saw her, Cora, standing at the edge of the dock, arms crossed, staring directly at me. NMY's stomach dropped. NSHE wasn't alone. Victor Malone, the company's head of operations and Cora's most loyal ally, stood beside her, hands in his pockets, face unreadable in the shadows. And I stepped off the boat slowly, keeping my movements casual, non-threatening. Didn't expect to see you here, I said. And Cora smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Funny, I could say the same. Thought you'd have taken your little inheritance and disappeared by now. Just checking her out, I said, nodding toward the boat. Making sure she's seaworthy. Seaworthy, Cora repeated, like the word tasted bad. That thing hasn't left the dock in 2 years, Damian. What are you really doing? I met her gaze, refusing to look away. Paying my respects. Dad loved this boat. Dad loved a lot of things, she said coldly. Doesn't mean they were worth keeping. Victor stepped forward slightly, his presence a quiet threat. We're here to make sure everything stays in the family, he said. No misunderstandings. No confusion about what belongs to who. I'm not confused, I said evenly. The boat's mine. Dad made that pretty clear. Cora's jaw tightened. The boat, yes. But if you found anything else, anything that belongs to the company, that's a different story. NSO, that's what this was. She knew. Or at least she suspected. I don't know what you're talking about. I said. NSHE took a step closer. Dad was sentimental. He kept things he shouldn't have. Records, files, old grudges written down like they mattered. If you found something like that, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to Fuller Maritime, which means it belongs to me. I shoved my hands in my pockets, feeling the folded document pressing against my ribs where I'd tucked it inside my jacket. If I find anything, I'll be sure to let Mr. Briggs know. NHER eyes flashed. You do that. NSHE turned and walked back toward the parking lot, Victor trailing behind her. I watched until their car disappeared into the night, taillights swallowed by the darkness. And only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. And back in the cabin, I locked the door and pulled the document out again, smoothing it flat on the navigation table. I took photos of every page with my phone, uploaded them to a secure cloud, and sent copies to Mr. Briggs with a single message. Found it. See you at 8 a.m. Then I sat down on the bunk, journal in hand, and kept reading. Because if Cora was already this worried, it meant Dad had left more than just ownership papers. He'd left a trail, and I was going to follow it all the way to the truth. And I barely slept that night. The boat rocked gently beneath me, the sound of water lapping against the hull, a constant rhythm that should have been soothing, but only kept me more alert. I'd decided to stay aboard rather than drive back to my apartment. Something told me I needed to be here, close to whatever else Dad might have left behind. NTHE journal sat on the navigation table, bathed in the yellow glow of the cabin's single overhead light. I'd read through it 3 times already, But each pass revealed new details I'd missed before. Dad's entries weren't just records of financial fraud. They were a chronicle of betrayal, written in real time as he watched his own daughter systematically dismantle everything he'd built. One entry, dated almost 4 years ago, stopped me cold. Damian came by the marina today. Didn't ask for anything, didn't want money or favors. Just wanted to help me sand the deck. We worked in silence for 2 hours, then shared a thermos of coffee and watched the sunset. Cora called 3 times during that span. Each time about money, contracts, or her next promotion. She doesn't understand that business isn't just about profit margins. It's about integrity. About knowing when to say no. Damian gets that. He always has. That's why I'm leaving him the truth, even if it costs him everything. And I set the journal down and rubbed my eyes. The cabin suddenly felt smaller. The weight of Dad's words pressing down on me like the ocean itself. He'd known this would happen. Known that Cora would fight. Known that I'd be standing here. Alone. Trying to make sense of pieces he'd deliberately scattered. NBUT. Why? Why not just confront her while he was alive? Why not cut her out of the will entirely? I flipped to the last entry in the journal, dated just 2 weeks before his heart attack. I could strip everything from Cora and give it all to Damian. Part of me wants to. But that wouldn't teach either of them what they need to learn. Cora needs to see what happens when greed becomes her compass. And Damian needs to learn that he's stronger than he thinks. That he doesn't need my permission to fight back. So I'm leaving them both a test. She gets the empire, but only the illusion of control. He gets the truth, and the choice of what to do with it. One of them will rise, one of them will fall. I already know which is which. NMY throat tightened. I stared at those last lines until they blurred. He'd set this up, deliberately. Not as punishment, but as a lesson. A final act of faith in me, and a final warning to her. And I closed the journal and reached for the USB drive. I'd been avoiding it, unsure if I was ready to see what else Dad had documented. But morning was coming fast, and I needed to know everything before I walked into Mr. Briggs' office. I pulled out my laptop, old and battered but still functional, and plugged in the drive. It took a moment to load, then a single folder appeared on the screen. For Damian, open only when ready, and I double-clicked. Inside were dozens of files. Spreadsheets, scanned documents, PDFs of contracts, and a folder labeled Video Files. My cursor hovered over that last one, my hand suddenly unsteady. And I clicked. N3 video files, each one labeled with a date. The most recent was from 6 months before Dad died, and I opened it. NTHE screen flickered, then Dad's face appeared. He was sitting in this very cabin, the same navigation table behind him, the same porthole window letting in afternoon light. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, more tired, but his eyes were sharp, focused. Damian, he began, his voice rougher than I'd remembered, weighed down by time and cigarettes he'd quit decades ago but never fully recovered from. If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And that means you found what I left for you. NHE paused, glancing down at something off camera, then back up. And I'm not going to apologize for how I handled things. I did what I thought was right, even if it doesn't feel fair. Cora got the company because she wanted it. She fought for it, clawed her way into every meeting, every negotiation. But wanting something and deserving it are two very different things. NHE leaned forward, elbows on the table. I've been watching her for years, son. Watching the way she cuts corners, the way she smiles at clients and then badmouths them the second they leave, the way she treats people like assets instead of human beings. She's smart, I'll give her that. But she's hollow. And hollow people break under pressure. NHE rubbed his face, suddenly looking exhausted. You, on the other hand, you never wanted any of this. You were happy fixing engines, teaching sailing lessons, living a quiet life. And for a long time I thought maybe that was enough, that you didn't need to be pulled into the mess I created. But then I realized something. You're the only one strong enough to handle the truth. Because you're not doing this for money or power. You're doing it because it's right. Dad reached beside him and held up a piece of paper, the same transfer of ownership document I'd found in the hull. This is your anchor, he said. 30% of Fuller Maritime. I signed it over to you 12 years ago, the day you turned 19. You don't remember because I told you it was just paperwork for a summer job. You signed it without reading it, trusting me completely. That trust is why I knew you'd be the right person to hold this. NHE set the paper down and looked directly into the camera, his gaze so intense it felt like he was sitting across from me. Cora's been stealing from the company for years. Small amounts at first, then bigger. She thinks I never noticed. But I documented everything, every transfer, every fake invoice, every shell company. It's all in the files on this drive. Enough to prove fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. NMY hands went cold. But here's the thing, Damian. I'm not asking you to destroy her. I'm asking you to give her a choice. Show her what you have. Let her see the consequences of her actions. And then let her decide if she wants to keep fighting or walk away with whatever dignity she has left. NHE leaned back, his expression softening. You've always been the better person, son. Kinder, more patient, more decent than anyone in this family had a right to expect. Don't let this turn you into something you're not. Use the truth, but don't let it poison you. NTHE video continued for another minute. Dad talking about technical details, file locations, contact information for forensic accountants he'd quietly consulted. Then he stopped, smiled that crooked smile I'd missed so much and said, I'm proud of you, Damian. I always have been. Don't forget that. NTHE's screen went black. I sat there in the dim cabin, staring at my own reflection in the dark monitor. My eyes were wet. I hadn't realized I was crying. And outside, the first light of dawn was starting to break over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep blue and pale gold. The marina was waking up. I could hear footsteps on the docks, the low rumble of a diesel engine starting somewhere nearby, the cry of gulls beginning their morning hunt. I wiped my face, closed the laptop, and tucked the USB drive into my pocket alongside the ownership document. Then I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken of the journal entries. I scrolled through them slowly, methodically, letting the patterns emerge. Shell companies, dummy accounts, falsified contracts. It was all there, a roadmap of deceit that led straight back to Cora. NBUT, there was something else too, something I'd missed the first time. One of the scanned documents on the drive was a memo, marked confidential, board eyes only. It was dated 3 months ago, long after Dad's death. The subject line read, Proposal for Asset Liquidation and Restructuring. NMI opened it. NTHE memo outlined a plan to sell off 3 of Fuller Maritime's smaller subsidiaries, the ones Dad had built from the ground up, the ones that employed people he'd known for decades. The projected profit was substantial, but the human cost was staggering. Over 200 jobs eliminated, entire communities affected. And at the bottom, in neat digital signature, was Cora's approval, NMY jaw clenched. This wasn't just about money anymore, it was about people. Families, livelihoods. Dad had known she'd do this. That's why he'd left me the tools to stop her. And I stood up, gathered everything into a weatherproof bag, and locked the cabin behind me. The sun was fully up now, the marina bathed in golden morning light. A few early risers nodded at me as I walked down the dock, coffee mugs in hand, faces weathered by salt and sun. One of them, an older man with a gray beard and kind eyes, called out to me, You Richard's boy? I stopped, turned. Yes, sir. NHE smiled, raised his mug in a small salute. He was a good man, fair, honest. This place won't be the same without him. Thank you, I said quietly. That boat of his, the man continued, nodding toward the second chance. He loved her more than anything. Said she taught him everything he needed to know about life. What's that? I asked. NTHE old sailor took a sip of his coffee, eyes distant. That the only way to find your direction is to trust the current, even when you can't see where it's taking you. I nodded slowly, letting those words settle. Then I walked to my truck, climbed in, and drove toward Mr. Briggs' office. NTHE current had pulled me here. Now it was time to see where it led. NMR. Briggs' office was located in a modest brick building on the edge of Ashford Bay's historic district, tucked between a bookstore and a cafe that had been serving the same coffee for 40 years. I'd been here once before, years ago, when Dad brought me along to sign some paperwork I didn't fully understand at the time. Now I knew exactly what that paperwork was. I parked across the street and sat for a moment, watching the morning foot traffic. Joggers, dog walkers, people in business casual, heading to offices nearby. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that I was sitting here with enough evidence to blow apart a multi-million-dollar empire. NMY phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. N, whatever you think you found, it's not what you think. Walk away now while you still can. NNO signature. No name. But I knew exactly who sent it. And I deleted the message and got out of the truck. NMR. Briggs was waiting for me in his office. Door already open. Coffee pot brewing on the small table near the window. He looked like he hadn't slept much either. His tie was slightly crooked. His usually neat desk covered in open files and legal pads filled with handwritten notes. "Damian," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming." And I set the weatherproof bag on his desk and unzipped it slowly. Everything's in here. The journal, the ownership transfer, the USB drive with video files and financial records. All of it. NHE pulled on a pair of reading glasses and reached for the ownership document first. His eyes scanned the page with practiced speed, lingering on the signatures, the notary seal, the witness names. "This is solid," he said quietly. "Emma Calloway is a respected notary, been working in this county for 30 years. If she witnessed this, it's legitimate. Was it filed?" I asked. NHE turned to his computer, fingers moving across the keyboard with surprising speed for a man in his 60s. "Let me check the county records." NTHE room fell silent except for the soft clicking of keys and the distant hum of traffic outside. I stood by the window, watching the street below, my reflection ghostly in the glass. "Here," Mr. Briggs said suddenly. "Filed June 18th, 12 years ago. 4 days after it was signed. It's been on record this entire time." Relief washed over me, so intense my knees almost buckled. "So it's real. It's enforceable." "Absolutely." He leaned back in his chair, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Damian, do you understand what this means? You're not just a beneficiary. You're a stakeholder with voting rights. Cora can't make major decisions without your approval. She never could. Then how has she been running things like she owns the whole company?" NMR Briggs' expression darkened. "Because no one knew you existed. Your father never disclosed the transfer to the board. As far as they knew, he retained full ownership until his death, then passed it entirely to Cora. She's been operating under that assumption, and so has everyone else." "So she didn't know either?" "I don't think so, not until recently." He pulled out one of the legal pads, flipping through pages of notes. 3 weeks ago, someone from the county clerk's office called my firm, asking about a transfer document involving Fuller Maritime. They wouldn't say who requested the information, but my guess is Cora's been digging. She must have suspected your father left something behind. NTHAT explained the visit to the marina, the thinly veiled threats. She'd been fishing, trying to figure out what I knew. "What about the rest?" I asked, nodding toward the USB drive. "The evidence of fraud?" NMR. Briggs picked up the drive, turning it over in his hand like it was a live grenade. "Before I look at this, I need to ask you something. What do you want to happen here?" I stared at him. "What do you mean? I mean, what's your goal? Do you want to take over the company? Expose Cora publicly? Negotiate a settlement? Because once we open this box, there's no closing it. If this drive contains what you say it does, we're talking criminal charges, federal investigations, possibly RICO statutes if there's organized fraud involved." NTHE weight of his words settled over me like a heavy coat. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'd been so focused on finding the truth, proving Dad hadn't forgotten me, that I hadn't considered what came next. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just want what's right." NMR Briggs nodded slowly. "Then let's look at what we have and go from there. NHE plugged the USB drive into his computer. For the next 2 hours, we went through everything. Spreadsheets documenting shell company transfers, invoices that didn't match shipping manifests, email chains between Cora and Victor Malone discussing how to hide certain transactions from the auditors, and the video files, all 3 of them, each one a piece of Dad's final testimony. NBY, the time we finished, Mr. Briggs looked 10 years older. "This is beyond anything I expected," he said quietly. "Damian, your sister hasn't just been skimming. She's been running a systematic embezzlement operation for at least 7 years. The amounts here add up to millions." "How much?" NHE pulled up a summary spreadsheet he'd been building as we reviewed the files. "Conservative estimate? $8.3 million. NMY stomach turned. "And Dad knew?" "He documented every transaction. He knew." Mr. Briggs closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "The question is, why didn't he stop her?" "He wanted her to stop herself," I said. "He gave her chances. He left clues, warnings. But she never changed. And now it's in your hands." Before I could respond, my phone rang. "Cora." I let it go to voicemail. And 30 seconds later, it rang again. And again. And on the 4th call, I answered. "And we need to talk," Cora said, her voice tight, controlled. "Now. I'm busy." "I know where you are, Damian. I know you're with Briggs. And I know what you think you have." "Then you know it's over." NSHE laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Over? You really think a piece of paper from 12 years ago changes anything? I've run this company for the last 5 years. I've tripled revenue, expanded into 6 new markets, negotiated contracts Dad never could have pulled off. The board trusts me. Clients trust me. You're just the guy who fixes boats. And you're the one who's been stealing from them," I said calmly. Silence. Then quieter, more dangerous. "You can't prove that." "I can. Dad made sure of it." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted, no longer angry but calculating. "Let's say you're right. Let's say Dad left some files, some accusations. Do you really want to drag this family through the mud? Destroy the company he built? Put hundreds of people out of work just to prove a point? This isn't about proving a point. It's about the truth." "The truth," she repeated bitterly. "The truth is that I saved this company." Dad was getting old, making bad decisions, letting sentiment cloud his judgment. Someone had to step up. Someone had to make the hard calls. By stealing? By doing what was necessary. Her composure cracked, voice rising. "You have no idea what it takes to run a business, Damian. The pressure, the competition, the constant threat of losing everything. I did what I had to do to keep us ahead." "You did what you wanted to do," I said. "And now you're going to face the consequences. If you push this, I'll bury you," she hissed. "I've got lawyers, resources, connections you can't even imagine. I'll tie you up in court for years. I'll make sure everyone knows you're just a bitter, jealous sibling trying to steal what you never earned. Then I guess we'll see what a judge thinks." I hung up. NMR. Briggs was watching me carefully. "That went well," he said dryly. "She's scared. She should be." He stood, gathering the documents into a neat stack. "I'm going to file a motion with the probate court to freeze all major company decisions pending review of the ownership structure. That'll stop her from making any moves while we sort this out. How long will that take? Could be weeks, could be months. Depends on how hard she fights." He paused. "You need to be prepared, Damian. This is going to get ugly. I know." NHE walked me to the door, then stopped, hand on my shoulder. "Your father was a good man, one of the best I've ever known. He believed in you. Don't let her make you doubt that." And I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. And outside, the day had turned overcast, heavy clouds rolling in from the Gulf. I climbed into my truck and sat there, engine off, just breathing. NMY phone buzzed again. This time it was a different number, one I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, then decided to answer. "Damian Fuller?" A woman's voice, older, cautious. "Yes? My name is Julia Patterson. I used to work in accounting at Fuller Maritime." I was let go 6 months ago, right after your father passed. I sat up straighter. Why are you calling me? Because I've been watching the news, seeing your sister on TV talking about expansion and success. And it made me sick. She fired me because I asked too many questions about discrepancies in the books. Told me I was being insubordinate. That I didn't understand how modern business worked. What kind of discrepancies? Payments to vendors that didn't exist. Invoices with inflated amounts. Money disappearing into accounts I couldn't trace. She paused. I kept copies. Everything I could get my hands on before they escorted me out. I've been waiting for someone to care enough to listen. NMY heart pounded. Can you send those to me? I can do better than that. I can testify. And after I hung up with Julia, I sat in the truck staring at the phone in my hand. This was bigger than I'd thought. It wasn't just Dad's evidence anymore. There were other people, other victims of Cora's greed. And they were ready to speak up. I started the engine and pulled out onto the street, heading back toward the marina. But as I drove, I noticed a black SUV 3 cars behind me. It stayed there through 4 turns, matching my speed exactly. I took a sudden right down a side street. The SUV followed. NMY hands tightened on the wheel. I accelerated, taking another quick turn, then another. The SUV kept pace, no longer trying to hide. I grabbed my phone and called Mr. Briggs. They're following me, I said as soon as he answered. Who? I don't know. Black SUV, tinted windows. Get somewhere public, now. And whatever you do, don't go back to the boat alone. I hung up and headed toward the busiest part of town, the shopping district, where cameras were everywhere, and people filled the sidewalks. The SUV followed for another 2 blocks, then suddenly turned off, disappearing down an alley. Uesai Tai pulled into a crowded parking lot and killed the engine, my heart racing. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. Uesai Da was playing for keeps. Yunai didn't go back to the marina that night. Instead, I checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where they still used physical keys and didn't ask questions as long as you paid cash. I parked my truck around back, out of sight from the main road, and carried everything inside. The journal, the documents, my laptop, and the USB drive that seemed to grow heavier with every hour. NTHE room was basic but clean. Single bed, small table, television bolted to the dresser, and a window that looked out over a parking lot and a stretch of scrub brush beyond. I closed the curtains, locked the door, and set up my laptop on the table. NFOR the next several hours. I went through the files again, this time taking detailed notes, creating my own timeline, cross-referencing dates with company records I could access through the publicly available annual reports. The pattern that emerged was damning. Every major contract Cora had negotiated, every expansion deal she'd celebrated in press releases, had a shadow version. Money flowing in through legitimate channels, then bleeding out through fake invoices, shell companies, and offshore accounts. NBUT, there was something else too. Something I'd missed in my first review. Buried deep in one of the subdirectories on the USB drive was a folder labeled Insurance Policy. I clicked it open. Inside were 3 files, 2 PDFs, and another video. NTHE first PDF was a legal document, dense with language I had to read 3 times to fully understand. It was a contingency clause, drafted by Dad and filed with a law firm in Houston, completely separate from Mr. Briggs' practice. The clause was clear. In the event that Damian Fuller was legally challenged, threatened, or his ownership stake disputed through fraudulent means, a full forensic audit of Fuller Maritime would be automatically triggered, funded by a separate escrow account Dad had established years ago. NTHE's second PDF was even more interesting. It was a letter of intent, signed by Dad, authorizing the release of all financial records to federal investigators if certain conditions were met. Those conditions included evidence of systematic fraud, threats against family members, or attempts to manipulate probate proceedings. Dad hadn't just documented Cora's crimes. He'd built a failsafe, a dead man's switch that would activate if she tried to destroy me. NMY hands were shaking as I opened the 3rd file. The video NTHE screen flickered to life. Dad again, but this recording was different. He was outside, sitting on the deck of the Second Chance, the marina visible in the background. Golden hour light painted everything warm and soft. He looked more relaxed here, a slight smile on his weathered face. "Damian," he began, "if you're watching this, then things have gotten complicated. Cora is probably fighting back, trying to discredit you, maybe even threatening you. I'm sorry, son. I wish I could have protected you from this. But some lessons can only be learned through fire. NHE shifted, leaning back against the cockpit cushions, hands folded in his lap. I want to tell you a story, something I never told anyone, not even your mother. He paused, eyes distant. When I started Fuller Maritime, I was 26 years old and had exactly $3,000 to my name. I bought a broken-down fishing trawler, fixed it up myself, and started running cargo up and down the coast. Small jobs, nothing glamorous. But I was honest. I showed up when I said I would. I delivered what I promised. And slowly, people started trusting me. Dad smiled at the memory. One day, about 5 years in, I got approached by a businessman from Dallas. Rich guy, connected, the kind of person who could make or break a small operation like mine. He offered me a contract worth more than I'd made in the previous 2 years combined. All I had to do was look the other way on some of the cargo manifests. Not ask questions, just run the shipments and keep my mouth shut. NHE looked directly into the camera. I turned him down, walked away from more money than I'd ever seen because I knew it wasn't right. And you know what happened? 2 months later, that businessman got arrested. Federal smuggling charges. Everyone connected to his operation went down with him. If I'd taken that contract, I would have lost everything. The company, my reputation, probably my freedom. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That taught me something, Damian. Integrity isn't about being perfect. It's about knowing when to say no, even when yes would be easier. Especially when yes would be easier. Cora never learned that lesson. She spent her whole life taking shortcuts, justifying compromises, telling herself the ends justify the means. And now she's in so deep, she can't see a way out except to keep digging. NHE stood up, the camera angle shifting as he adjusted the tripod. But you're different. You've always been different. When you were 16, you found a wallet in the marina parking lot with $800 cash inside. You didn't hesitate. You tracked down the owner and gave it back, even though I know you were saving for that motorcycle you wanted. The guy tried to give you a reward and you refused, said it wasn't yours to keep. And I remembered that day. I'd forgotten about it until now, but hearing Dad describe it brought it all back. The worn leather wallet, the driver's license inside, the way the elderly man had nearly cried when I returned it. That's who you are, son, Dad continued. That's why I'm trusting you with this. Not because you're ruthless or clever or willing to do whatever it takes, but because you're decent. And decency, real decency, is the rarest thing in the world. NHE sat back down, and for a moment he just looked at the camera, his expression soft and sad. There's one more thing you need to know. The ownership transfer I gave you, the 30% stake, it comes with a clause, a protection mechanism. If anyone tries to remove you through legal manipulation, fraud, or coercion, control of the entire company defaults to an independent trustee I appointed. A woman named Faith Gilbert. She's a retired federal judge, someone I've known for 30 years. She has copies of everything. The journal, the financial records, all of it. NMY breath caught. Another layer of protection I hadn't known existed. Faith has instructions to hold the company in trust until the fraud is investigated and resolved. Cora can't touch it. Can't sell it. Can't liquidate it. Can't make any major decisions. She'll be frozen out completely. Dad smiled, but there was sadness in it. I didn't want it to come to this. I kept hoping she'd change, that she'd realize what she was doing before it was too late. But I also knew I had to protect the company and everyone who depends on it. The employees, the clients, the community. They don't deserve to suffer because of her choices. NHE stood again, this time moving to the rail of the boat, looking out over the water. You're going to have to make a choice soon, Damian. You can use what I've given you to take her down completely. Expose everything, press charges, let the system run its course. She'll probably go to prison. The company will survive, but the family never will. NHE turned back to the camera. Or you can give her one last chance. Show her what you have. Let her see the consequences lined up like dominoes. And offer her a way out. She walks away, gives up control, and disappears quietly. No criminal charges. No public humiliation. Just exile from the empire she tried to steal. Dad's expression hardened. But if you choose mercy, make sure she understands this. You're not doing it because you're weak. You're doing it because you're strong enough to choose compassion over vengeance. And if she ever comes back, if she ever tries to hurt you or this company again, there won't be a second chance. NHE walked back to the camera, reaching out to stop the recording. I love you, son. I'm proud of the man you've become. Whatever you decide, I'll be proud of that too. NTHE screen went black. I sat in the dim motel room, the only light coming from my laptop screen, and felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not grief, but clarity. Pure, crystalline clarity about what needed to happen next. And Dad had given me the tools, the evidence, the protection, the choice. Now I had to decide what kind of man I wanted to be. I closed the laptop and pulled out my phone. It was nearly midnight, but I called Mr. Briggs anyway. NHE answered on the first ring. Damian, are you all right? I need you to set up a meeting, I said. Tomorrow. Cora, her lawyers, you, me, and Faith Gilbert. The trustee your father appointed? You know about her? Your father briefed me years ago in case something like this happened. She's been on standby waiting for my call. Then call her. Tell her it's time. And tell Cora's lawyers that if she doesn't show up, I'm filing criminal charges and releasing everything to the press by end of business. NMR Briggs was quiet for a moment. Are you sure about this? I'm sure. What are you planning? I'm going to give her a choice, I said. The same one Dad gave me. And after I hung up, I lay back on the bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A text from an unknown number. You're making a mistake. Last chance to walk away. And I deleted it without responding. And then another buzz, this time from Julia Patterson, the former accountant. And I have more than I told you. Call me when you can. This goes deeper than just Cora. And I sat up, dialing her number. She answered immediately. What do you mean? Deeper? I asked. Victor Malone, she said, her voice tight. He wasn't just helping Cora. He was running his own scheme. Skimming from the company's fuel contracts, creating fake maintenance orders, pocketing the difference. I have documentation going back 4 years. NMY jaw clenched. How much? Conservative estimate. 2 million. How I closed my eyes. It wasn't just Cora. The rot had spread further than I thought. Can you have that documentation ready by tomorrow afternoon? I asked, already done. I've been preparing for this moment for 6 months. Then I'll see you tomorrow. And Julia, thank you for not giving up. NHER voice softened. Your father was a good man. He didn't deserve what they did to him. I'm just glad someone's finally holding them accountable. And after we hung up, I pulled the journal out again, flipping to one of the middle entries. Dad's handwriting, slightly shaky, dated about a year before he died. Damian came by again today. Didn't call ahead, didn't ask for anything. Just showed up with lunch and spent 3 hours helping me organize the storage lockers. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. That's what I love about him. He understands that showing up is sometimes more important than saying the right thing. Cora's called twice this week, both times asking about revising the trust structure. She doesn't understand that trust isn't something you restructure. It's something you build, day by day, through actions, not words. I wish I could make her see that. But I don't think she ever will. Anna closed the journal and set it aside. Tomorrow, everything would come to a head. Cora would have to face what she'd done. Victor would be exposed. And I would have to decide whether to be the avenging son or the merciful brother. Dad had given me the power to choose. Now I had to live with whatever choice I made. I turned off the light and lay in the darkness, listening to the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Somewhere out there, Cora was probably awake too, planning her next move, calculating her options, trying to find a way to win. NBUT, this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about truth. And truth, as Dad always said, had a way of surfacing no matter how deep you tried to bury it. I just hoped I was ready for what came next. NTHE meeting was set for 2 o'clock at a neutral location, a private conference room at the Ashford Bay Business Center downtown. Mr. Briggs had arranged everything, making it clear to Cora's legal team that attendance was mandatory and refusal would result in immediate legal action. And I arrived 15 minutes early, parking in the underground garage and taking the elevator to the 3rd floor. The conference room was spacious and sterile, all glass and chrome, with a long table surrounded by leather chairs and a wall-mounted screen for presentations. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the bay, sailboats dotting the water in the afternoon sun. Mr. Briggs was already there, along with a woman I didn't recognize. She stood as I entered, extending her hand with a firm, no-nonsense grip. "And Damian Fuller," she said. "I'm Faith Gilbert. Your father and I go back a long way." NSHE was in her late 60s, tall and commanding, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore a navy suit and carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of making difficult decisions. "Thank you for being here," I said. "Your father made me promise I would be, if things ever got to this point." "I'm sorry they did." She gestured to the chair beside her. "Sit. We need to go over the ground rules before they arrive. NFOR the next 10 minutes. She laid out exactly how this would proceed. I would present the evidence first, without interruption. Then Cora would have the opportunity to respond. After that, Faith would outline the options, and Cora would have until end of business to make her choice. "No negotiation," Faith said firmly. "No haggling or lawyer tricks. She gets one choice, and whatever she decides, we move forward immediately." "What if she refuses both options?" I asked. "Then we file criminal charges within the hour. I have a federal prosecutor on standby." She looked at me carefully. "Are you prepared for that possibility?" NTHE door opened before she could respond. Cora swept in like she owned the building, 2 lawyers flanking her, Victor Malone trailing behind. She wore a designer suit, heels that clicked sharply against the floor, and an expression that was equal parts confidence and contempt. NSHE stopped when she saw Faith, her composure flickering for just a second. "Judge Gilbert," she said, the word judge carrying an edge of disbelief. "I didn't realize you were involved in family matters these days." "I'm not," Faith replied coolly. "I'm involved in matters of fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty, all of which fall well within my expertise." Cora's lawyers exchanged glances. One of them, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit, stepped forward. "I'm Wesley Ford, representing Ms. Fuller. We're here as a courtesy, but I want to make it clear that any allegations made in this meeting are categorically denied and will be vigorously defended." "Noted," Faith said. "Sit down." They did, Cora taking the chair directly across from me, her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that would have been intimidating if I hadn't spent the last 3 days preparing for this exact moment. NMR. Briggs stood, moving to the front of the room. "Let's begin. Damian, the floor is yours." And I stood slowly, pulling the USB drive from my pocket and handing it to Mr. Briggs. He plugged it into the presentation system and the wall screen flickered to life. "3 days ago," I began, my voice steady, "I found a waterproof case hidden in the hull of my father's boat. Inside was a journal, financial records, and video testimony recorded by Richard Fuller in the months before his death." NTHE screen displayed the first page of the journal, Dad's handwriting clear and bold. This journal documents 7 years of systematic fraud committed by Cora Fuller and Victor Malone. Embezzlement, falsified invoices, money laundering through shell companies, and breach of fiduciary duty to Fuller Maritime's board and shareholders. And Cora's expression didn't change, but her jaw tightened. And I clicked to the next slide, a spreadsheet summarizing the financial discrepancies. Conservative estimate of funds stolen, $8.3 million. This doesn't include the secondary schemes run by Victor Malone, which add another $2 million. Victor's face went pale. He opened his mouth, but Wesley Ford cut him off with a sharp gesture. "These are serious allegations," Ford said. "But allegations aren't proof. You'll need more than a journal and some spreadsheets." "I have more," I said calmly. I clicked to the next slide, a scanned image of a wire transfer receipt. This is a transfer of $340,000 from Fuller Maritime to a shell company called Vanguard Logistics. The company doesn't exist. It was registered using a P.O. box in Delaware, and the account receiving the funds is controlled by Cora. And I clicked through a dozen more examples, each one meticulously documented, cross-referenced with bank statements and incorporation papers. Dad didn't just write down what he saw, I continued. He investigated. He hired a private forensic accountant, someone who works exclusively with federal prosecutors. That accountant verified every transaction, traced every dollar, and prepared a full report. And I turned to face Cora directly. He also recorded video testimony. 3 separate recordings, each one outlining exactly what you did and why he documented it. Would you like to see them? And Cora's composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're taking the paranoid ramblings of a sick old man and turning them into some kind of conspiracy theory." Dad was losing his edge toward the end. Everyone knew it. "Then explain this," I said, clicking to a new slide. It was an email chain between Cora and Victor, discussing how to hide a particularly large transfer by spreading it across multiple fake invoices. The language was careful, coded, but the intent was clear. "This email was sent from your company account," I said. 3 months ago, long after Dad died. So unless he was sending emails from beyond the grave, this isn't about his mental state. It's about your actions. Wesley Ford leaned forward, studying the screen carefully. His expression shifted from defensive to concerned. He turned to Cora, lowering his voice. "Is this real?" NSHE didn't answer. And I clicked to the next slide, a photo of the ownership transfer document. "There's one more thing you should know. 12 years ago, Dad signed over 30% of Fuller Maritime to me. It's been on file with the county this entire time. You've been making major decisions without the required shareholder approval. Every contract you've signed, every expansion you've pushed through, every restructuring plan, all of it is legally questionable because you didn't have the authority to act alone." NTHE room went completely silent. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. Wesley Ford stood abruptly. "I need to consult with my client privately." "No," Faith said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You stay." She made her choices publicly, benefiting from the authority she claimed. Now she faces the consequences publicly. Cora's face flushed red. "You have no right to dictate terms." "I have every right," Faith replied. "I'm the trustee appointed by your father to oversee this company in the event of fraud or misconduct. As of this moment, all major decisions require my approval. You're effectively frozen out until this is resolved." And Cora shot to her feet. "You can't do this." "I already have," Faith said calmly. She pulled a document from her briefcase and slid it across the table. "Signed this morning by a federal judge. Fuller Maritime is under temporary administrative oversight pending investigation." Wesley Ford grabbed the document, scanning it quickly. His face went from concerned to grim. "Cora, sit down." "No," she hissed. "This is a setup. Damian's been planning this, poisoning Dad against me, probably forging half these documents." "I have an affidavit from the forensic accountant," Mr. Briggs said quietly. "I have testimony from Julia Patterson, your former accounting manager who you fired for asking too many questions. I have documentation from 3 other employees who witnessed irregularities. And I have your father's video testimony, recorded on 3 separate dates, all verified by timestamps and metadata analysis." NHE paused, letting that sink in. "This isn't a setup. This is justice. 7 years delayed." And Cora slowly sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. And Faith stood, commanding the room's attention. "Here are your options. Option 1. You resign from Fuller Maritime immediately. You forfeit all ownership claims, all voting rights, and all executive compensation. You sign a legally binding agreement never to work in the maritime industry again. In exchange, we don't press criminal charges. You walk away with your freedom and whatever personal assets you haven't already stolen." And Cora opened her mouth, but Faith held up a hand. "And option 2, we file criminal charges today. Federal prosecutors take over the investigation. Everything becomes public. Your clients see the evidence. Your employees see the evidence. The media sees the evidence. You'll face trial for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. If convicted, you're looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison." NTHE color drained from Cora's face. "You have until 5 o'clock today to decide." Faith continued. "If you choose option 1, you'll sign the resignation papers in this room, witnessed by all parties. If you don't respond by 5, we proceed with option 2 automatically." NSHE sat down, folding her hands calmly. Wesley Ford was furiously scribbling notes, occasionally leaning over to whisper to Cora. Victor looked like he might be sick. "What about him?" I asked, pointing to Victor. "He's just as guilty. Mr. Malone will face separate proceedings," Faith said, "but his crimes are tied to hers. If she resigns and cooperates, his charges may be reduced. If she fights, he goes down with her." Victor turned to Cora, panic in his eyes. "You need to take the deal." "Shut up," she snapped. NBUT. I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. She was weighing her options, running through scenarios, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Finally, she looked at me, really looked at me, and for just a second I saw something I'd never seen before. Recognition. Not of me as her brother, but of me as an equal. Someone who'd outplayed her at her own game. "Did he really plan all this?" she asked quietly. "Dad?" "He did," I said. "He gave you chances to stop. You just never took them." NSHE laughed bitterly. "Of course he did. Right up until the end. Still trying to teach me lessons I was never going to learn." NSHE stood, smoothing her suit, composure returning piece by piece. "I'll have my answer by 5. See that you do," Faith said. And Cora walked to the door, her lawyers scrambling to follow. Victor hesitated, looking back at me like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it and hurried after them. NTHE door closed, leaving just me, Mr. Briggs, and Faith in the sudden quiet. That went better than I expected. Faith said, "Better?" I asked. She didn't agree to anything. "She will," Faith replied confidently. "She's smart enough to know when she's beaten. The question is whether she'll do it gracefully, or make us drag her out kicking and screaming." And I sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried me through the presentation was fading, leaving behind a hollow ache. NMR Briggs placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did well, Damian. Your father would be proud." And I nodded, unable to speak. Through the window, I could see the bay stretching out toward the horizon, boats moving peacefully across the water. Somewhere out there was the second chance, waiting patiently at her slip. And for the first time in days, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could breathe again. NTHE call came at 4:47 p.m. 13 minutes before the deadline. NMR. Briggs. Name flashed on my phone screen. I was sitting in my truck in the marina parking lot, windows down, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. I'd been there for hours, unable to go anywhere else, unable to do anything but wait. She signed. Mr. Briggs said simply, "It's over." I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. What about Victor? He's cooperating fully, providing additional documentation in exchange for reduced charges. He'll likely serve some time, but nothing like what he would have faced. And Cora? She's gone, Damian. Cleaned out her office in under an hour. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Her lawyers are handling the final paperwork, but she's effectively disappeared. And I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Thank you for everything. Your father chose well when he trusted you with this," Mr. Briggs said quietly. "Not everyone would have given her the choice you did." And after we hung up, I sat in the truck for another long moment, then climbed out and walked down the dock to slip 29. The second chance rocked gently in the evening breeze, her hull catching the golden light. She looked different somehow, lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her wooden bones. I stepped aboard and went below deck, pulling the journal from where I'd stored it in the navigation locker. I sat at the small table, running my fingers over Dad's handwriting one last time. Then I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do through this entire ordeal. I cried. Not from sadness or anger, but from release. From the sheer weight of carrying a burden I hadn't fully understood until it was lifted. When the tears finally stopped, I climbed back up to the cockpit and pulled out my phone. There was a text from my mother, the first communication I'd had from her since the will reading. I heard what happened. "We should talk." And I stared at the message for a long time, then deleted it without responding. Some bridges once burned weren't meant to be rebuilt. Instead, I opened the photo gallery on my phone and found the picture I'd taken of the Polaroid, me and Dad standing beside this very boat. I set it as my lock screen, replacing the generic background I'd had for years. The marina was quiet now, the evening settling in with that particular peace that comes with endings. I could hear the gentle clank of halyards against masts, the cry of gulls heading to roost, the distant hum of the town winding down for the night. And I thought about what Dad had said in that final video. About integrity being the choice to say no when yes would be easier. About decency being the rarest thing in the world. I'd spent so much of my life thinking I was the spare son, the forgotten one, the disappointment. But Dad had never seen me that way. He'd seen someone worth trusting with the truth, someone strong enough to wield it without being corrupted by it. And I pulled out the keys to the second chance and held them up to the fading light. They were mine now, really mine, not as consolation prize or cruel joke, but as inheritance. As legacy to end tomorrow, I'd start the real work. Taking over operations at Fuller Maritime, rebuilding trust with employees, making things right with the clients Cora had deceived. It would be hard. Complicated. There would be people who resented me, who thought I'd stolen what was hers. NBUT tonight, I just sat on the deck of my father's boat and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, and people say family is everything. But I'd learned that sometimes family is the people who see you, who believe in you, who trust you with their truth, even when the world says you're not enough. Dad saw me. That was everything. And I started the engine, letting it rumble to life beneath me. For the first time in years, I untied the dock lines and pushed away from the slip, NTHE second chance, and I had somewhere to be. Out past the breakwater, where the water ran deep and the horizon stretched forever. NW here, second chances were born. And up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.